Tonight we are going to find out who invented New Year's Eve, and why the whole world agreed to act dramatic at the same time. We will drift through ancient midwinter festivals, stubborn Roman paperwork, medieval date confusion, and the invention of standardized midnight, until we land in fireworks, Times Square, and the quiet sacred notebook. Get cozy, keep the volume low, and let us watch time pretend to be orderly for once. Chapter 1. The Night People Invented Tomorrow. In the quiet part of December, when the dark outside behaves like it owns the place, humans do what they always do. They light something small, a candle, a hearth, a stubborn little oil lamp. Then they stare at the light as if it owes them answer. Tonight I have a mug of something warm and a blanket that has seen too many winters to be impressed. Somewhere nearby, a small bowl of oranges tries its best to smell like optimism. The tree lights are not blinking, because blinking is for people who still believe in surprises. And this is the setting where we talk about a strange invention. Not fire, but bread. Not that useful idea where you stop putting wet shoes directly on the fire. No. We are talking about New Year's Eve, the ceremonial moment when people pretend time is a hallway with a clearly marked door. Because it is not. Time is more like a cat. It goes where it wants. You can call it, you can shake the treats, it will still walk past you with a look that says you are adorable and confused. But humans do not like that. Humans want a calendar. Humans want a line on paper that says this is the end, this is the beginning, please be tidy about it. Humans want a clean page even if the ink from last year is still wet. If you have ever stood at midnight and promised to become a better person, you have participated in an ancient ritual. A ritual of negotiating with the dark. A ritual of telling the cold world, I see you, and I will be fine anyway. It starts before calendars become something you can buy in a bookstore. It starts when people notice that winter is not a mood, it is a cycle. It starts when someone looks at the sky and realizes the stars are not random glitter, they are a repeating pattern. It starts when the sun slips away early and the air gets sharp, and the animals look at you like you should have prepared more. In early villages, long before anyone had an office job, the year was mostly weather. It was the taste of the first greens, it was the sound of insects returning. It was the moment you could finally sleep without listening for wolves or without listening for your own thoughts, which were sometimes worse. And then came midwinter, the turning point. The season that arrives like a stern relative, checks the pantry, and says nothing. Midwinter was the time when people felt the edge of their own limits. Well, the cold was not jet cold, it was a question. Are you still here? Are you still together? Did you store enough? Did you make enough friends? So they made festivals, of course they did. Not because they were naive, because they were practical. A festival in midwinter is not just a party, it is a social tool. It makes people share, it makes them gather, it makes them sing loud enough to convince themselves that the dark is only a background, not a verdict. In Northern Europe, the word Yule would later hang around like a familiar scarf. In Scandinavia, midwinter gatherings left traces in later traditions, even if the shape of the old feasts shifted under new religions and new politics. In Rome, Saturnalia would become famous for flipping social rules and letting the world breathe for a moment. In China, the Dongji festival marked the winter solstice with family and food, because a warm bowl and a full room have always been better than despair. In the Andes, in the Americas, in places where the seasons behave differently, people still made rituals for the sky. Humans are consistent that way. We look up, we get nervous, we make soup. Now imagine a very early winter festival. No fireworks, no champagne, not even a polite little countdown, just firelight, breath in the air, and a circle of people who know one truth. If the sun does not come back, there is no plan B. That is soft tension. That is the quiet kind, the kind that does not scream. It sits next to you and watches the door. In that circle, someone starts telling stories. Someone sings. Someone pulls out a carved piece of bone or wood with marks on it. Not for decoration. For tracking. Nights. moons, the slow, stubborn march of time. This is where the first calendars are born, not in marble temples, in hands, in memory, in the need to know when to plant, when to move, when to prepare. A calendar is a tool for survival that later becomes a tool for complaining. At first it is simple. Count the moons. Count the days between one full moon and the next. Count until something important happens, like the return of warmer wind. Then start again. The moon is convenient. It is visible. It changes in a way that feels like a schedule. But it is also a trickster. 12 lunar months do not match the sun year neatly. So if you rely only on the moon, your seasons drift. Your spring festival starts showing up while you are still wearing 3 layers and regretting your choices. Early people noticed this, even if they did not use the words drift or solar year. They noticed because their bodies noticed. They noticed because plants and animals do not care about your moon math. They care about temperature and light. So the calendar had to become smarter, or at least more stubborn. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, city-states like Uruk and Ur and later Babylon developed careful observations of the sky. Priests and scribes tracked lunar months, and when the seasons started to slide, they added an extra month now and then. An intercalary month, a bonus month. Time, with a little patch job, like a cloak repaired at the elbow. In ancient Egypt, the Nile had its own opinion about scheduling. The flood was the heartbeat of the year, and people learned to watch for the heliacal rising of Sirius, the bright star that signaled the flood season. They developed a civil calendar of 365 days, tidy and confident, with 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 extra days. The calendar looked neat. The sky did not sign the agreement. The Egyptian civil year slowly drifted through the seasons because it did not include leap days, but it worked well enough for administration, which is a phrase that can excuse almost anything in history. In all these places, the year was not a dramatic new start. It was a wheel. It turned. People adapted. They did not need a single night to declare transformation. They needed predictability. And still, the idea of a turning point remained. A moment when you could say, we made it to here. A moment when the darkness was deepest, and therefore the smallest hint of returning light felt like a victory. So let us sit with that ancient midwinter night again, because it matters. People gather. The air smells like smoke and cooked grain. Someone is worried, and someone else pretends not to be. Children do not fully understand the stakes, which is a gift. An elder watches the fire and remembers winters that were worse. There is a quiet decision in the group. We will mark this night. Not because the universe asked, because we need to. They do not call it New Year's Eve, they do not have a year number, they do not have a sparkling hat, but they have the same impulse that you feel when you clean the kitchen before guests arrive. The impulse to make order, to tell yourself that you can control at least the edges. The earliest calendars are not romantic, they are accounting. They are the first ledgers. They say, we have this many days until the herd needs moving. We have this many days until the river should rise. We have this many nights until the moon is full and we can travel more safely. And then, because humans are also artists, the ledger becomes a story. The marks on bone become a myth. The season becomes a ritual. The ritual becomes a festival. Somewhere along the way, someone decides that the edge of the year should feel special, that the turning of the cycle deserves a pause. Now I know what you are thinking. You are thinking that people in the distant past were pure and wise and close to nature. Calm down. They were also people. They argued about whose turn it was to carry water. They made decisions that did not age well. They had fashion choices that were brave. And when the chance came to make a deadline out of thin air, they did it with enthusiasm. It is human nature. If we cannot control the sun, we will control the calendar. If we cannot control the winter, we will control the story we tell about winter. There is a gentle irony here. We create a boundary in time, then we act as if that boundary has power. We say, this is the last day, so it matters more. We say, this is the first day, so I can restart. We give the data personality, like it is a manager who can approve our new habits. But boundaries help. even imaginary ones. That is why they keep returning. So in Chapter 10, the invention is not a single event. It is a gradual accumulation of human behavior. Midwinter festivals, moon counting, early calendars, the need to survive and the need to feel like survival means something. If you listen closely, you can still hear it under the modern noise, under the music and the countdown and the clinking glasses. You can hear the old winter question, "Are we still here?" And then the answer, whispered into the dark, "Yes, we are still here." In the next chapter, we will meet the people who professionalize this impulse, the scribes, the priests, the administrators, the ones who looked at the sky and said, "This is lovely, but I need it in a table." Chapter 2. Calendars, Complaints, and the First Manager named Time. If Chapter 2 was the warm circle around the fire, Chapter 2 is the moment someone shows up with paperwork. Not a villain, exactly. More like a person who cannot relax until everything is labelled. There is always what. They are the kind of person who looks at a midwinter festival and says, "Wonderful, but what day is it?" They do not mean it rudely. They just have a brain that feels calm only when chaos has a column header. So let us step into the ancient world again, but this time we stand closer to the places where writing takes hold. Because once you can write, you can store time outside your head. And once you can store time, you can argue about it with more confidence. In Mesopotamia, writing grows from trade and administration, clay tablets, styluses, and the patient work of scribes. These scribes track goods, land, labor, and taxes, and soon they track days because days are part of everything else. When a debt is due, you need a date. When a festival is planned, you need a date. When a king wants everyone to remember a victory, you need a date, and preferably one that makes the king look impressive. The Babylonian calendar, for much of its history, is lunar-solar. It uses lunar months but tries to stay aligned with the solar year by adding extra months when needed. This is not casual. It requires observation, authority, and agreement. Someone has to decide, we add a month now. Someone has to convince everyone else, and if you have ever tried to get a group to agree on dinner plans, you know how that goes. In early times, the decision could be based on observations of the seasons and the stars. Later, more formal cycles develop. The point is, even in ancient cities, time is not dot astronomy, it is governance, it is power. Whoever controls the calendar controls the rhythm of work, tribute, and ritual. In ancient Egypt, the situation is both elegant and stubborn. The civil calendar of 365 days is clean. 12 months. 30 days each. 5 additional days at the end of the year, often treated as special. It is simple enough to run a state. It is also slightly wrong in the way that becomes very wrong if you wait long enough, because the solar year is a little longer than 365 days. Over time, the Egyptian civil calendar drifts through the seasons. And yet it persists, because administration likes stability more than it likes perfection. You can schedule grain deliveries with a drifting calendar. You can organize labor. You can collect taxes. The flood and the farmer will adjust. Humans can be impressively adaptable when the alternative is rewriting all the forms, but not everyone is pleased. There is always someone who points out that the calendar is slipping. There is always someone who says, "We celebrated the harvest festival while the fields still look confused." There is always someone who says, "Perhaps we should fix this." This is where the quiet tension enters, the tension between the sky and the state, the tension between observation and order. The sky does not care about your tidy months, the state does. Some cultures lean more lunar, some lean more solar, many try to combine them. And every combination is a compromise, like trying to fit a blanket that is the wrong size onto a bed and pretending it looks fine. The moon is visible and intuitive. The solar year is what seasons follow. If you pick only where, the other will eventually embarrass you. So early calendar makers invent tricks. Add a month, add a day, rename something. Declare that a month starts when a priest says it starts. It sounds arbitrary, and it is, but it is also functional. The goal is not cosmic truth. The goal is to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to worship, when to pay. Now imagine a scribe in a city like Babylon, seated in a cool room with a clay tablet. He is calm, he is trained, he has a stylus and an expression that says, "I have done this before." Outside, the market is loud. Inside, the scribe writes in measured strokes. He records the month name, he records the day count, he records that a certain official delivered barley, he records that a temple planned a ceremony. He records the world as a sequence, because sequences can be managed. Then a messenger arrives, breathless, with news that the month will be extended. An extra month will be added this year. The scribe closes his eyes for a moment, not in rage, but in the kind of weary acceptance usually reserved for weather. Because an extra month means every due date shifts, every festival shifts, every plan becomes a new plan. The sky has demanded a correction, and the state must comply, and the scribe must rewrite his neat little world. He does it because that is his job, but he does not have to enjoy it. This is how time becomes personal. Not because it is romantic, because it interferes with your schedule. The Greeks later will also rest with lunar solar calendars and cycles that try to reconcile lunar months with solar years. The Metonic cycle, associated with Meton of Athens in the 5th century before the Common Era, notes that 19 solar years are close to 235 lunar months. This kind of insight is both brilliant and extremely inconvenient, because it means someone has to keep track of 19 years at a time. Humans can barely keep track of where they put their keys. But the effort continues because the prize is alignment, a calendar that matches the seasons and therefore matches life. Elsewhere, different solutions appear. In Mesoamerica, complex calendar systems develop, including the Harb and the Tzolk'in, interlocking cycles with ritual and civic functions. In China, traditional calendars combine lunar months with solar terms, keeping festivals aligned with seasonal markers. Across the world, people build timekeeping systems that reflect what they value, what they fear, and what they need to coordinate. The point is, New Year is not born from one civilization alone. The idea of a year boundary is a human pattern, repeated with local flavor, but there is a special ingredient that begins to show up in Chapter 2. Authority. Once calendars are tied to temples and kings, the start of the year can become a political choice. If you decide the year begins at harvest, you honor the field. If you decide it begins in spring, you honor renewal. If you decide it begins at midwinter, you honor survival. Each choice tells a story about what matters, and if you are a ruler, you might prefer the story that makes you look like the sponsor of order. So the first New Years, in a broad sense, are often tied to festivals and renewal ceremonies. In Babylon, the Akitu festival is associated with the New Year in spring, with ritual reaffirmation of kingship and cosmic order. The details vary across periods, but the theme is recognizable. The community resets, the state announces continuity, the gods are politely invited to keep cooperating. It is not quite the modern idea of New Year's Eve. There is not yet a global midnight. There is not yet a universal date. There is, however, the idea that one time is different from another, because we say it is. The sarcasm here is gentle because it is also relatable. We still do this. We decide that Monday means productivity. We decide that September means a fresh start. We decide that the first day of a month is a moral event. The calendar does not demand this. We do. And it helps, sometimes. Back in the scribal room, the scribe finishes adjusting the dates. He checks the tablet, he breathes out. He feels that rare and delicate satisfaction of order restored, even if it is temporary. Outside, winter approaches, or spring, or flood season, depending on where he lives. The city continues. Time continues. The scribe does not know that thousands of years later, someone will stand in a living room under soft Christmas lights, holding a warm mug, and talk about him in a sleepy voice, but he has contributed something important. He helped turn time into a shared agreement. He helped make the year a thing you can point at. In the next chapter, the story tightens further, because we will arrive at Rome, where changing the calendar becomes a public performance, and where January first starts to matter in a way that echoes into modern life. There will be power, reform, and the particular Roman talent for making administration feel like destiny. Chapter 3. Julius Caesar moves the furniture and calls January 1st. There is a particular kind of confidence that appears when someone believes the universe is a problem that can be solved with a meeting. You have seen it in modern life. A person points at a complicated situation, says we will streamline this, and then everyone quietly checks where the exits are. In ancient Rome, that confidence found a comfortable home. Rome liked order, and Rome liked power, and Rome liked the kind of paperwork that makes order and power feel official. The Roman talent was taking messy human reality and giving it a neat name: taxes, titles, roads, laws, and eventually, time. If you want to understand how New Year's Eve grows into the modern creature we know, you have to stand for a while in the Roman world, where the calendar became both a public schedule and a political instrument. The Roman calendar did not start as a perfect machine. It started as a lively inconvenience. Early Roman timekeeping was famously awkward, with months that did not line up cleanly, adjustments that depended on authorities, and a general sense that the calendar was less a mirror of the sky and more a negotiation between tradition, religion, and whoever happened to be in charge. The year itself, for a long stretch, did not begin in January. It began in March. That made a certain kind of sense. Spring returns, life stirs, armies can move again, and everyone feels slightly less betrayed by the weather. March was associated with Mars, and Rome appreciated a month that sounded like it could carry a spear and also file a report. But then Rome started building an empire, and empires have a problem. They need schedules that travel. They need contracts that mean the same thing in different places. They need the kind of shared time that lets administrators breathe. There were also politics. In the Roman Republic, consuls were elected and took office. The start date for that office mattered, because it set the rhythm of governance. Shifting that start date could help Rome react faster to military campaigns and administrative needs. Over time, January began to matter more, because it became connected to the start of the consul year. January is named for Janus, the two-faced god of doors, gates, and transitions. Janus looks both forward and backward. If you're going to choose a month to feel like a threshold, that is a pretty good mascot. Janus is basically a built-in reminder that humans live between what happened and what might happen next. Rome liked symbols that did double-duty. A god for doors is also a god for beginnings. A month named for that god is a month that can carry meaning without needing too much explanation. Rome loved meaning that arrived pre-packaged. Still, the Roman calendar had serious drift issues. By the 1st century before the Common Era, the calendar was not keeping clean alignment with the seasons. This was not a small aesthetic issue. It affected agriculture, festivals, and administration. The mismatch between the calendar and the sky became a civic headache. Adjustments existed, but they were managed by officials, and those adjustments could be used for political advantage. If you can add days to extend a term or shift timing to benefit allies, the calendar becomes tempting. Humans, when handed a lever, tend to pull it. This is where Julius Caesar enters the room wearing the expression of someone who has decided that the room should be redesigned. Caesar had power, ambition, and a willingness to impose order. He also had a practical reason to act. A state cannot function smoothly if the calendar is drifting, disputed, and manipulable. So Caesar did what confident people do. He reformed it. He consulted experts, including the Alexandrian astronomer Sosigenes, and pushed through a new system. The Julian calendar, introduced in the mid-1st century before the Common Era, was based on a solar year of 365 days, with a leap day added every 4 years. This is the part where the universe briefly cooperates. A solar-based calendar with regular leap days is a solid idea. It is not perfect, but it is stable. It is the kind of stability that makes administrators weep softly with relief. To realign things, the reform required a brutal-sounding correction year where extra days were added to bring the calendar back in step with the seasons. It was a year that felt unusually long to the people living through it. The calendar, like an overstuffed suitcase, needed to be pressed back into shape. Now, this is not yet New Year's Eve as a party. It is not yet a global midnight. It is a political and astronomical event dressed in the plain clothing of dates. But it matters because of what it implies. It implies that a year is a defined unit with a defined start. It implies that society can agree on that start. It implies that the future is a page you can turn on purpose. And here comes the very Roman flourish. The shift that made January 1st the effective beginning of the year, tied to the start of civic office, gained strength in this era. The year boundary began to settle. A transition that had been fuzzy became a door with a sign on it. I want you to imagine a Roman clerk on the last day of December, somewhere in the city, maybe near the Forum, maybe in a cramped office that smells like ink and wax. He is holding a wax tablet. He has written dates until his hand feels permanently cramped. His job is to keep time obedient. Outside, Rome is noisy. Vendors argue. Sandaled feet scuff stone. Somewhere, someone is making a speech that will later be summarized badly. And in the middle of this, the clerk notices that tomorrow is January 1st, and that means something official. He does not necessarily feel joy. Joy is not the default setting of a clerk. He feels something else, a sense of closure, a sense that the work is being reset. He can draw a line, start a new column, label it with a new year. This is where the idea starts to become familiar, not universal yet, but recognizable. The fresh ledger page, the clean slate feeling, which is really just the same slate with different chalk marks, but let us not ruin it. Humans need their illusions, the harmless ones at least. Around him, Rome has its own ways of observing beginnings. There are offerings to Janus, there are good wishes, there are small gifts. The act of acknowledging the transition becomes part religious, part social, part administrative. That is Rome at its best, blending ritual and logistics like it is normal. The gentle sarcasm here is that the calendar reform is treated like it is fate, when it is also a very human decision. Caesar did not ask the sun for permission. He asked experts, then asked the state to comply, and the state did, because Caesar was not someone you ignored if you wanted a quiet life. Still, even the powerful reform meets the slow reality of culture. Note everyone immediately feels the year begins where the law says it begins. People keep habits, regions keep traditions, and as Rome turns into an empire and later fractures, the calendar remains, but the emotional meaning of the year boundary shifts from place to place. The Julian calendar spreads widely in Europe because of Roman influence and later Christian adoption. It becomes the baseline structure for much of the Western world for centuries. January 1st becomes increasingly common as a year marker, but not uniformly, and not without competition. So Chapter 3 gives us a key ingredient, the idea of an official year start anchored by state power and a solar calendar. It is the moment the doorframe gets installed, even if different households keep walking through different doors for a long time. Back in the winter room where we started, the tree lights stay steady, the mug cools, and you can feel the odd comfort of realizing that our modern traditions are built on a long chain of people who wanted the same thing. A sense of order, a sense of safety, a sense that you can name the moment you move forward. Next, we step into a world that keeps moving New Year around like furniture during a storm. The medieval and early modern centuries will take this neat Roman door and install it in different walls, at different angles, and occasionally behind a curtain. Chapter 4. The Middle Ages keep moving New Year like a sofa. If Rome tried to make the year behave, the Middle Ages looked at the year, nodded politely, and then did whatever was locally convenient. This was not always incompetence. Sometimes it was theology, sometimes it was tradition, sometimes it was the simple truth that communication was slow and authority was layered, and everyone had an opinion. You can think of it like this. Rome built a calendar that worked well enough for administration, then the medieval world inherited that tool, along with new religious frameworks and local customs. The result was a long period where the calendar existed, but the New Year date was not universally agreed upon. This is where New Year's Eve becomes less a single concept and more a roaming idea, like a cat again, walking from one household to another, deciding where it wants to sleep. In many parts of medieval Europe, the question was not what is the calendar, but when does the year begin for practical purposes? And the answer varied. Some places kept January 1st, some preferred March, some used March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, as the start of the year. Some treated Easter as the year marker, which is an especially dramatic choice if you enjoy confusing accountants. Easter is movable, changing date each year based on a calculation tied to the moon and the spring equinox. If your new year is Easter, your year begins when the sky and the church agree, which is poetic, and also a nightmare for your records. Other systems existed too. In some contexts, Christmas served as a year boundary. In others, the beginning of September, sometimes associated with older Roman administrative cycles or Byzantine influence, mattered in particular regions, so you could travel across a relatively short distance and find that the year changed on a different day. You could write a letter dated one year, and the recipient might file it under another. You could sign a contract and later argue about when it started, not because you were dishonest, but because you were trapped inside a local definition of time. This is not the loud kind of chaos. It is the quiet kind that shows up in ledgers, in court records, in the tired sighs of clerks who just want to know what year it is without needing a theological footnote. Let us meet one of those clerks. He is a merchant in a medieval town. He is not rich enough to be carefree and not poor enough to ignore paperwork. He sells cloth perhaps, or salt, or wine. He has a stall, a storage room, and a ledger. His ledger is his life, tracks who owes him, who paid, what he paid to the guild, what he paid to the lord, what he promised his family. It is the fragile thread between survival and surprise. Now the merchant has learned a trick. He keeps 2-year notations, one for the town, one for his own sense of sanity, because the town might consider the year to begin in March, while a trading partner in another region might count from January 1st. So the merchant writes dates with extra care. He adds notes like according to the local year or according to the January style. He does not use those words aloud, he just knows which version he means. This is where soft tension lives. Not in battles, not in grand speeches, but in the small anxiety that you might misfile a payment and be accused of cheating, or you might show up for a delivery a week early and look foolish, or you might celebrate the new year, then have someone tell you it is not actually the new year yet, and you realize you have been emotionally premature. It is the kind of tension that modern people still recognize. You set your watch wrong by a few minutes, and suddenly you feel like the world is judging you. Time is social. Being out of sync feels like being out of place. Religious influence shaped this deeply. Medieval Europe lived by a Christian liturgical calendar layered over the civil wine. The rhythm of saints' days, feast days, and holy seasons structured life. Choosing a New Year date tied to a major religious event made sense culturally. It embedded civil time into sacred time. March 25th, for example, carried meaning as a celebration connected to the beginning of the incarnation narrative. Starting the year, they could feel like aligning the calendar with a theological beginning. Christmas, as a year start, would emphasize birth and arrival. Easter, as a year start, would emphasize renewal and victory over despair. Each choice told a different story about what kind of world you lived in. Meanwhile, practical life continued to demand dates for taxes, rents, and legal matters. So officials developed local conventions. In England, for a long period, the legal New Year was often treated as beginning on March 25th, even as people might also recognize January 1st in different contexts. Other regions used other styles. In France, different practices existed over time, and local traditions could vary. In Italy, city-states had their own customs, and you could feel the personality of a place in how it treated the year boundary. In parts of the Holy Roman Empire, variation was a feature, not a bug. In places influenced by Byzantine practice, September could matter. So when people today say the calendar was confusing in the Middle Ages, that is true but also incomplete. It was confusing in a highly organized way. It was confusing with rules. It was confusing with confidence. The humor here is gentle. Imagine a town meeting where someone says we should all agree when the year begins. Then 5 people stand up and explain why their date is sacred, traditional, or better for trade. Then one tired clerk says, "I do not care, I just want one answer." Then everyone ignores him. Now you might wonder where New Year's Eve is in all this. If the year begins in March, then New Year's Eve, the last day of the year, would be late March. If it begins at Easter, then New Year's Eve shifts around like a floating plank. The concept of a single night of transition exists, but it is not anchored to the same place on the winter calendar everywhere. That matters because the modern feeling of New Year's Eve is deeply tied to winter, to darkness, to the sense of closing a year while candles and fireplaces are doing their best work. In much of medieval practice, that winter feeling was not always paired with the official year boundary. Yet the human impulse did not vanish. People still marked midwinter, they still held feasts, they still shared food and stories. They still made small rituals to help the season feel survivable. Those midwinter traditions would later blend with the more standardized January 1st New Year as Europe gradually moved toward that date. So we have two streams running at once. The midwinter festival stream, ancient and emotional, tied to survival and darkness, and the official New Year stream, administrative and legal, tied to documents and authority. In the medieval and early modern periods, those streams do not always line up. Sometimes they cross, sometimes they run parallel, sometimes they argue quietly in the same town. Our merchant, for example, might celebrate midwinter with his family, exchanging small gifts, sharing spiced food, perhaps attending church, perhaps telling stories by firelight. He might feel that midwinter is a turning point, even if his ledger says the year will not officially change until March. Then March arrives, the roads are muddied, the air smells like thaw, the merchant is busy, and someone says Happy New Year, because the legal year changed. The merchant nods and says yes, of course, Happy New Year, while thinking, we already did the emotional part back in winter. This split is important. It shows how New Year's Eve as a singular cultural event needed something else to fully form. It needed standardization. It needed broader agreement. It needed a world where distant places could share a date and a midnight. That world is coming, but not yet. For now, the Middle Ages keep moving New Year around like furniture, adjusting it to fit local rooms, local beliefs, and local needs. The year boundary is a tool, not a universal celebration. The ritual exists, but it is not globally synchronized, and it is not always winter-flavored. Back in our modern winter room, you can feel the comfort of knowing that the confusion eventually settles, not because humans suddenly become reasonable, but because trade, printing, and administration apply pressure. When more people need to coordinate across distances, multiple New Years become less charming and more expensive. In the next chapter, we will watch which of the biggest standardizing pushes arrives, a reform that fixes drift more precisely, and a transition that makes some people feel like days were stolen, even though time itself never signed the receipt. Chapter 5. Pope Gregory fixes the math, and everyone reacts normally. By the time Europe reached the early modern period, the calendar had been living a double life for centuries. On paper, it looked respectable. In practice, it was slowly drifting away from the sky like a boat that insists the river is wrong. The Julian calendar that Julius Caesar gave the world was a strong attempt at keeping the year aligned with the seasons. It used a leap day every 4 years. That is simple, sturdy, and easy to remember, which is important because humans are not built for remembering complicated rules without turning them into songs. But the solar year is not exactly 365 and 1/4 days. It is a little shorter than that. So the Julian calendar added slightly too much time. Not enough to notice over a weekend, but enough to notice over centuries. The result was drift. The calendar inched forward relative to the equinoxes. The spring equinox, which mattered for religious calculations, especially for determining Easter, began appearing earlier on the calendar than it should. At first, this is the kind of problem only certain people care about. Farmers noticed seasons with their bodies, not their documents. But the church cared about dates. The church cared about the liturgical year. The church cared about Easter, and Easter cared about the relationship between the moon and the equinox. So the drift became a serious concern. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that makes educated people clear their throats and say, "This is not ideal." Now imagine a scholar in a drafty room with ink-stained fingers and a calm, worried face. He has been staring at tables. He has been comparing observation. He has been thinking the kind of thoughts that cause a person to forget where they left their bread. He knows the calendar is off. He knows it will get worse. And he knows that if you want to fix it, you need authority. You need someone with enough reach to say, "We are doing this now," and you need to say it in a way that makes people comply. That someone, eventually, was Pope Gregory XIII. In the late 16th century, after years of discussion and proposals, the Gregorian reform was introduced. The goal was twofold. First, correct the accumulated drift so that the equinox returned to its intended place on the calendar. Second, adjust the leap year rule so the drift would not build up again as quickly. The correction was blunt and elegant at the same time. Days were skipped to bring the calendar back into alignment. The change was the kind of thing that makes people feel like time itself has been rearranged, even though time continues to stroll forward without checking in. Then came the new leap year rule. The Gregorian calendar kept leap years, but not every century year would be a leap year. Century years would be leap years only if divisible by 400. This small rule change reduced the long-term drift. If you are the kind of person who likes your calendar to match the sky, this is good news. If you are the kind of person who likes your calendar to stay the same forever, this is an insult. Now we arrive at the human part. Reform is never just math. Reform is feelings. People did not all adopt the new calendar at once. Some countries and regions accepted it relatively quickly, especially Catholic ones. Others delayed for religious or political reasons, or simply because changing a calendar is a surprisingly intimate interference in daily life. The calendar is how you remember birthdays. The calendar is how you plan harvests. The calendar is how you pay rent. When someone says we are skipping days, you do not hear astronomy. You hear, "What do you mean I lost a week of my life?" There is a famous kind of story that floats around this period, people protesting that days were stolen from them. Some of this is exaggerated in later retellings, but the emotional logic is real. Humans hate the feeling of losing time, even when the loss is only on paper. Let us meet a schoolmaster in a small town somewhere in Europe, in the era when calendars are being argued about with seriousness and the occasional dramatic sigh. He stands at the front of a room with a slate or a book and he tries to explain the change. He says in patient language that the calendar is being corrected. He says the old system was drifting. He says this will make seasons line up better with the dates. The children stare. They do not fully understand. They do understand that their next day off might move and that is what matters to them. One parent raises a hand and asks if the rent is still due on the old day or the new day. Another parent asks whether a saint day is being moved or whether the saint will simply adjust. The schoolmaster closes his eyes for a brief moment, not in anger, but in the quiet acceptance that he has become a calendar diplomat. He tries again. He says the days are not being removed from the world, only from the calendar. He says the sun did not change its mind. He says this is about matching the calendar to the sun more precisely. Someone in the back mutters that it sounds like the Pope is bossing the sun around. Someone else replies that the Pope is bossing everyone around, which is more accurate. The schoolmaster continues anyway because he has a job and it involves calm persistence. This is how reform spreads, not like a heroic march, like a tired conversation repeated many times until people finally decide to update the ledger. And the ledger is where the Gregorian calendar really shows its power. Because in trade, in law, in administration, shared time is valuable. A world that is growing more connected needs a calendar that stays aligned and consistent. As printing spreads and literacy increases, calendars become more standardized and more widely distributed. People start buying almanacs. People start expecting dates to mean the same thing in different towns. When expectations harden, local variation becomes costly. So even when adoption is delayed, the pressure builds. But the delays matter for New Year's Eve, because the modern idea of a shared year turning depends on shared agreement about the year itself. If your neighbour uses a different calendar, your midnight is not only out of sync, your whole year is. During these centuries, the year boundary is becoming more uniformly January 1st in many places, but there is still variety. The Gregorian reform does not instantly create a universal new year, but it strengthens the infrastructure that makes universality possible. And it does something else. It teaches people to think of the calendar as a system that can be corrected. It teaches that timekeeping is not only tradition, it is engineering, it is policy, it is something you can improve. This is both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because it means we can fix mistakes. Unsettling because it means the thing you thought was stable is actually negotiable, so the humour stays gentle. We are watching people realise that their favourite holiday is partly a spreadsheet problem. Back in our winter room, the candle flame stays steady. The tree lights hum quietly. This is the part where you might feel grateful that you do not have to live through a calendar reform. You already have enough to do. But we should not pity the past too much. They were doing something important. They were aligning human agreements with physical reality. They were building the kind of shared structure that makes later shared rituals possible. In the next chapter, that sharing becomes more intense, not because of popes, but because of trains. When trains arrive, local time becomes a problem. When timetables arrive, minutes become serious. When railroads run across regions, the world starts demanding synchronization. And once the world is synchronized, midnight becomes a more meaningful concept. The birth of a standardized midnight is one of the quiet steps toward the modern New Year's Eve. Chapter 6: Trains, Time Zones, and the Rise of One Official Midnight. Before railroads, time was local in a way that now feels almost tender. Noon was when the sun was highest where you stood. Towns set clocks by local solar time. A few minutes of difference between places was not a crisis. It was just geography having a personality. You could travel from one town to another and discover their noon was not your noon, and everyone accepted this because travel was slow and you had time to adjust. If you were late, you blamed the road, the weather, your horse, or fate, which was convenient because fate never writes back. Then the 19th century arrived with its particular enthusiasm for speed. Railroads did not only move people and goods, they moved expectations. They made distance smaller and schedules sharper. They introduced timetables, which are documents that look harmless until you try to run a network with them, while every town insists it lives in its own private noon. At first, railways used local times. Stations would keep their own clocks. Conductors would carry watches. People would argue about whose clock was correct. If you think modern time zone confusion is annoying, imagine trying to coordinate trains across dozens of local times. It is not romantic. It is a tragedy performed entirely in missed connections. The soft tension here is practical. If two trains are meant to share a track at different times, time must be shared. If schedules are off, delays pile up. Worse, safety becomes an issue. Coordination is not optional when speed increases. So the railroads started making time more standardized. In Britain, for example, railway companies began using a standard time based on Greenwich. Greenwich Mean Time became widely used for railway scheduling, and later spread as a civil standard. This was not only a technical choice, it was a cultural shift. It meant the clock in your town could be set by a distant reference, not by the sun above your roof. For some people that felt like progress. For others it felt like surrendering to a machine. Let us meet a station master, because station masters are excellent characters for this story. A station master is a person who tries to make time behave while time continues to be a cat. Our station master stands on a platform as winter air bites gently at his cheeks. He has a pocket watch. He has a timetable. He has the kind of posture that suggests he has been explaining the same thing to impatient travellers for years. A traveller asks, "When does the train arrive?" The station master looks at the clock, looks at the watch, looks at the timetable, and answers with calm confidence. The traveller nods, then adds, "Is that local time?" The The station master pauses because this question is the whole problem in one polite sentence. He explains that the railway uses the standard time. He explains that the clock on the wall follows it. He explains that if you keep local time in your head, you will miss trains and feel betrayed. The traveller frowns and says the sun says it is not that time. The station master responds, very gently, that the sun does not operate trains. This is how time zones are born, not out of philosophical debate, but out of operational necessity. As rail networks spread across larger territories, the problem expanded. In the United States and Canada, for example, vast distances made local time differences more dramatic. A train moving across longitudes crosses many minutes of solar time. If every town kept its own noon, a national timetable would become an elaborate prank. The solution was to divide the world into time zones, each covering a slice of longitude with a shared standard time. This idea developed over time through practical use and later international agreement. It was not instantly perfect. It was a negotiation, like most human systems, but with more clocks involved. In the late 19th century, standard time zones became more formalized, and the concept of a prime meridian at Greenwich gained international recognition at conferences that tried to convince the world to agree on at least one thing. This mattered for New Year's Eve because it created the possibility of a shared midnight, or at least a shared kind of midnight. Before standardization, midnight was local. The new year could turn quietly in your town, while a town a short distance away was still in the old year. That is still true today because time zones remain, but the difference is that now the zones are agreed upon, labelled, and broadcast. Once you have standardized time, you can do something new. You can coordinate celebrations, you can schedule public events for a specific moment. You can announce that the new year will arrive at midnight, and you can trust that the clocks will mostly cooperate. Mostly. Now, even with time zones, midnight still arrives at different moments across the world. That becomes part of the modern charm. New Zealand greets the new year, then hours later Europe, then later the Americas. In modern life, that becomes a rolling wave of celebrations, each one a reminder that the world is large and also connected. But in the era we are visiting, the key shift is not global simultaneity. The shift is that midnight becomes a precise point, not a vague darkness between days. It becomes a number on a clock. It becomes something you can count down to. Counting down is a very human thing. It is also a very theatrical thing. If you can count down, you can build suspense. If you can build suspense, you can build a tradition. If you can build a tradition, you can eventually sell snacks. There is a second shift too. The more life is organized by clocks, the more people start to think of time as a sequence of units that can be managed. Hours, minutes, deadlines. New Year becomes not only a seasonal marker but a timestamp. This is where the quiet personal tension appears. When time is standardized, you are more aware of it. You cannot pretend you did not know the hour. The clock is always there, bright and indifferent. So the New Year boundary becomes psychologically sharper. Not only a change in date, but a change in the number on the year line. A change you can watch happening in real time. Imagine a family in the late 19th century, perhaps in a growing city, with gas lamps and a clock on the wall that is set carefully, not by the sun, but by a published standard. They have a newspaper. The newspaper prints the time, the railway sets clocks, the city becomes synchronized. As the evening of the last day of the year arrives, the family does something humans love. They prepare, they tidy, they gather. They decide the moment matters. They might not yet have modern fireworks displays. They might not yet have televised countdowns, but the idea is forming. Stay up, wait, watch the clock, cross the threshold together. The station master, elsewhere, is still working. Trains still run. The timetable still demands obedience. For him, midnight is not only symbolic, it is operational. It marks shifts, schedules, and responsibilities. And that is part of what makes modern New Year's Eve possible. The blend of symbolism and logistics. Once time is standardized enough, a society can treat midnight as a shared moment. That shared moment can become a ritual can become a celebration can become a mass event. So Chapter 6 is about infrastructure. It is about the hidden scaffolding under the modern party. The sarcasm here is mild but unavoidable. Humans did not invent standardized time because they wanted better kisses at midnight. They invented it because they wanted trains to stop colliding with schedules and with each other. The romance came later, riding in a third-class carriage with a suitcase full of glitter. Back in our winter room you can hear the distant modern world. Someone somewhere is already planning a countdown. Someone somewhere is already ordering party hats. Someone somewhere is making a playlist titled New Year Vibes, which is a phrase that would have made a station master blink slowly, but the station master would understand the core impulse. He knows what it is to care about a moment. He knows what it is to stand by a clock and wait for the next thing to arrive. In the next chapter, the story moves from infrastructure to spectacle. Once a society can agree on midnight, it can perform midnight. Fireworks will join the scene and public celebrations will become a controlled way to release collective energy. The dark sky will become a stage, and the year will become something you do, not only something that happens. Chapter 7. Fireworks and other approved forms of controlled excitement. Once a society can agree on what time it is, it starts getting ideas. At first, the idea is simple. Stay awake, notice the moment, step over the threshold together. That alone is enough to make people feel like they have done something meaningful, even if the only measurable outcome is that everyone is a little tired. Then humans do what they always do when they feel something. They decorate it. They add sound. They add light. They add a ritual so obvious that even the most distracted person can tell that a transition is happening. Enter fireworks, the traditional method of telling the sky that you have feelings. Fireworks did not begin as party supplies. They began as a useful accident, as many important things do. In ancient China, people noticed that bamboo thrown into a fire could pop and crack as air pockets heated. It was loud, startling, and therefore immediately classified as spiritually helpful. If you make a loud noise, you might frighten away whatever unseen thing is bothering you. This is a comforting logic. It is also the logic of a household cat, who believes thunder is a personal insult. Later, the loud noise gained chemistry. Experiments with mixtures like saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal led to gunpowder, and gunpowder led to the discovery that humans can turn a celebration into an engineering project. Firecrackers and early fireworks became part of festivals, including New Year celebrations, because when you are welcoming a new cycle, it is polite to clear the air of bad luck by startling it out the door. This is the emotional job fireworks perform. They are not only pretty, they are also a kind of dramatic cleaning. They say, "We are done with that year. We are making room. Please leave quietly or loudly. We are flexible." As knowledge traveled west over centuries, fireworks spread into European celebrations, especially royal events and public festivities. Courts loved displays because courts love being seen. A fireworks show is a convenient way to tell the crowd, the ruler has both resources and taste. The resources are obvious, the taste is debatable, but the smoke covers the debate. Over time, fireworks became less royal and more public. Cities discovered that a shared sky is a shared stage. People discovered that looking up together creates a sense of community that lasts just long enough to feel real. That is the quiet magic of it. In a crowd, everyone can be a little anonymous, but also a little connected. You can stand next to strangers and still feel like you are doing the same thing at the same time. It is one of the gentler ways humans manage loneliness. Now, New Year's Eve is a particularly good night for fireworks, for two reasons. First, it is winter in many parts of the world, and winter skies are dramatic by default. Second, the year boundary comes with built-in suspense. You do not have to invent a reason to count down. The calendar hands you a reason, stamped and approved. This is where the celebration becomes modern in its shape. The moment is no longer just felt, it is performed. Imagine a town square in the 19th century, or early 20th, in a place where clocks are now synchronized enough that people trust the midnight moment. There is cold air, layered coats, and breath that rises like quiet smoke. A local band plays something determinedly cheerful. Someone sells warm drinks. Someone else sells the idea that cold is fun if you are standing near enough to other humans. A few people are visibly excited. A few people are pretending not to be excited, which is a classic form of excitement. Children are awake far past their usual bedtime, which makes the night feel like a small rebellion. Adults pretend it is fine and then later complain about it, because adulthood is often just organized complaining. As midnight approaches, the crowd becomes attentive, not loud yet, but focused. There is a soft tension in the air. Not fear exactly, more like anticipation mixed with the awareness that the year is leaving and you are still you. A date change does not unmake your habits. It does not pay your bill. It does not fix your personality. And still, you want it to mean something. That is the emotional engine of the night. You know it is symbolic. You still want it. Then the countdown begins. Counting down is a theatrical invention that feels natural because humans love numbers when they are moving toward a moment. 10, 9, 8. Your voice joins others. Your breath joins others. Your heart joins a rhythm that is mostly imaginary but that is fine. Most of the best things are. At midnight, there is noise, light, and relief. Fireworks crack the sky. People cheer. Some people hug. Some people kiss. Some people look awkward and hold their drink like it is a personal shield. Some people look up and think, I survived another year. Some people look down and think, I am not sure I did. But the fireworks do their job. They interrupt the ordinary. They make the boundary feel real. Here is the gentle sarcasm offered softly like a blanket. Humans love the idea of a clean break, but we cannot resist adding mess. We add confetti. We add smoke. We add music. We add crowding. We add the exact ingredients that make a clean break impossible. And yet the mess is part of the point. A new year is not meant to be sterile. It is meant to be lived. In many cultures, the new year carries older beliefs forward. Loud noises to chase away bad luck, bright lights to invite good fortune, food to promise abundance, gatherings to promise that you are not alone, even if you are. So the modern celebration becomes a braid of old motives and new tools. Ancient midwinter courage, lunar and solar bookkeeping, standardized clocks, chemical light in the sky. At this stage in the story, New Year's Eve is becoming a public event in more places, especially in growing cities. Cities are good at turning emotion into tradition. Cities have public spaces and public attention. Cities have newspapers and later radio, which can tell everyone where to gather and why. Also, cities have the kind of restlessness that needs an outlet. A crowd in winter needs a reason to stand outside together without admitting it is for the comfort of being part of something. And now we get closer to a particular city that became a global symbol of this night. Not because it was the first to celebrate, not because it was the only where with fireworks, but because it understood something important about the modern world. If you can make a shared moment visible, you can make it famous. New York City, like many cities, held New Year celebrations that grew in scale. Fireworks were part of the story and public gatherings grew into traditions. The idea of a central place where people could gather, count down, and watch a spectacle became more defined. But fireworks are not always convenient. Fireworks can be unpredictable. Fireworks can be loud in ways that annoy the neighbors, and if there is one thing history teaches us, it is that neighbors have opinions. So cities began to develop more controlled symbols, more reliable signs that the moment had arrived, something you could see clearly, even if you were far back in the crowd, even if the sky was foggy, even if you had been standing in the cold too long and your patience had started to freeze. A bright object, a simple motion, a clear signal. This is the moment when New Year's Eve begins to choose its modern costume. Not only fireworks, not only noise, a visual cue that can be repeated every year like a reliable little promise. In the next chapter, we will step into Times Square, where a neighborhood gets a new name, a building becomes a stage, and a falling ball becomes one of the strangest, calmest, most effective symbols ever invented for a worldwide midnight. Chapter 8: Times Square, the Ball Drop, and the Invention of Shared Attention. There are places that feel like they were designed to collect human attention, not because the earth demanded it, but because humans built them that way, layer by layer, sign by sign, story by story. Times Square is one of those places. It began with a name change, which is a very human way to cast a spell. If you name something, you claim it. If you rename something, you tell everyone to update their mental map, and you also tell them who had the authority to do the renaming. In the early 20th century, the area once known as Longacre Square was renamed Times Square after the New York Times built its tower there and moved its operations into the neighborhood. A subway station helped pull people in. Electric signs began to appear. The district started to glow, and once something glows in a city, humans gather around it like moths who believe they are making thoughtful decisions. Times Square became a crossroads of transit and entertainment. That matters because New Year's Eve needs two things to become a famous ritual. It needs a crowd, and it needs a stage. A street can hold a crowd. A building can become a stage. At first, public New Year celebrations in Times Square involved fireworks. A midnight celebration with fireworks is a simple proposition. You gather, you look up, you cheer. You go home cold but satisfied, convinced you have participated in history. But as traditions grow, they get refined. Sometimes the refinement is about safety. Sometimes it is about style. Sometimes it is about the simple fact that a repeating ritual benefits from a signature move. This is where the ball drop enters, one of the most literal metaphors humans have ever loved. The year is dropping, the moment is descending, the suspense is falling toward midnight. It is simple, it is visual. It works even if you are half frozen and your brain has stopped doing advanced thinking. In the first decade of the 20th century, the first ball drop in Times Square was held on the last night of the year, welcoming the next year. A lighted ball was lowered from a flagpole atop the Times building. It began its descent shortly before midnight. The crowd watched. The moment arrived. The year changed. Everyone felt for a second that they were standing inside a shared heartbeat. It is worth noticing what has happened here. The New Year boundary has become a performance with a centerpiece. This is the invention of shared attention as a ritual. In older times, you might share attention around a fire, watching the flames. In a temple, you might share attention toward an altar. In a medieval town, you might share attention toward a church bell. In Times Square, you share attention toward a glowing object on a building, surrounded by lights and signs. The object is not sacred, and yet it becomes sacred in the modern sense. It becomes a symbol that carries a feeling. It becomes a tradition you can repeat without needing to understand why it works. Now let us meet a stagehand, because every public ritual depends on people who do the work quietly. The stagehand stands on a rooftop in winter. The wind is sharp. The city below is a living creature made of movement and noise. The stagehand checks the mechanism, checks the rope, checks the lights, checks everything twice, because this is New York City and the crowd does not accept excuses that start with the words "we thought it would be fine." He is not thinking about ancient Babylon or Julius Caesar. He is thinking about gravity and timing. He is thinking about the fact that a simple drop has to happen at exactly the right moment, because the whole point is that the crowd trusts the signal. Down on the street, people gather early. They press into coats and scarves. They buy snacks. They laugh. They complain. They do the normal human thing of pretending discomfort is part of the fun. A reporter is nearby with a notebook, watching faces, collecting details. The reporter knows that a story like this is not only about the ball, it is about the feeling of being there. The reporter watches a couple holding hands, watches an older man who looks like he has seen too many winters and is still here anyway, watches a young person who is trying to look sophisticated and failing in a charming way. The reporter writes it down. The city becomes narrative. As the final minutes approach, a hush moves through the crowd, not total silence, but a shift. People become aware. The air changes, the street becomes a room, and the roof becomes a stage. Then comes the count. There is something oddly calming about a shared count. It is collective focus without argument. It is a small mercy. The ball begins its descent, the crowd watches it fall through the winter air, lights glow, the moment stretches, a whole year reduced to a single motion, and then midnight arrives, cheers rise, sound becomes weather, people throw confetti, people hug, people call someone they love, people promise things they will try to keep. Some people stand very still and let the feeling wash over them, because they have learned that not every moment needs to be performed outwardly. Above them, the stagehand exhales, the mechanism worked, the city received its signal, the year changed on schedule. This is the modern invention in full view, a ritual that is not tied to a harvest or a solstice or a religious feast, but tied to synchronized clocks and urban spectacle. A ritual designed to be seen, repeated, and eventually broadcast. And broadcasting is the next step, because the moment you create a ritual that looks good from a distance, you invite the rest of the world to watch. Times Square becomes a symbol not only because of the crowd, but because the event can be represented. A ball dropping is easy to understand. It does not require translation, it does not require a theology degree. It is a picture that says, the new year is arriving now. Over time, the ritual continues year after year, with changes in the details, changes in the ball design, changes in the technologies that make the light brighter and the timing smoother. But the core stays the same. A visible descent, a collective count, a shared transition. There is a mild irony here, delivered gently. The most famous New Year's tradition in the world is watching an object move downward. Humans are inspirational in many ways, and also extremely simple. But perhaps that is why it works. The year is complicated, the symbol is not. Back in our winter room, the tree lights continue their quiet glow. The mug is warmer again because I have refilled it, which is the kind of personal renewal that actually changes something. Outside, the dark still holds the windows. Inside, the story keeps turning. Next, we follow the ritual from the street into the living room. Radio and television will turn the public countdown into a private companion. The midnight moment will become something you can share without leaving your sofa, which is either a triumph of comfort or the soft unaliving of silence, depending on your mood. Chapter 9. Television Specials and the Soft Unaliving of Silence. There was a time when New Year's Eve belonged to the street. You put on extra layers, you stepped outside, you joined a crowd. You let the cold bite your cheeks and told yourself this was character building. You watched a public signal, a bell, a light, a ball, a burst in the sky, and you crossed into the new year with strangers whose names you did not know but whose breath you could see. Then technology arrived and did what technology always does. It offered convenience and asked for attention in return. Radio was an early step. It carried voices across distance and made time feel shared even when bodies were not. A countdown broadcast could turn a private room into a small extension of the public square. You could sit at home and still feel connected to the moment. You could be warm and still be part of the ritual. Humans love warmth. Humans also love being included. Radio was an excellent combination for New Year's. Then television arrived and made the whole thing visible. This is a strange turning point in the history of celebration. The modern world took a moment that used to demand presence and created a version you could consume from a chair. The living room became a viewing platform. The couch became a front row seat. The winter night became a program. At first, this was exciting. Imagine a family gathered around a television set in the mid-20th century. The screen is small, the picture is imperfect, the sound sometimes crackles. And yet the miracle is that you can see the crowd somewhere else, you can see the lights, you can see the hosts, you can see the shared countdown, and you can feel like you are inside it without leaving your warm home. For many people, this was not a downgrade, it was a gift. Not everyone wants a crowd, not everyone wants cold air in their lungs, not everyone wants to fight for a view of a ball and then walk home with numb toes. Television made participation easier, but television also changed the shape of the ritual. When a celebration becomes a broadcast, it becomes structured. It has segments, it has hosts, it has sponsors, it has planned emotions, it has the calm certainty of a schedule that will continue whether you feel inspired or not. This is where New Year's Eve becomes a product as well as a tradition. The show needs a build, it needs a warm-up, it needs performances, it needs interviews, it needs a sense that something is happening, even while time is simply moving at its usual speed. So you get TV specials, you get music, you get comedy, you get recaps of the year, which is a ritual that invites everyone to pretend they remember the year clearly, even though most people only remember the parts that left a mark. You also get the strange modern phenomenon of the televised resolution, where a host tells you that you can start fresh, and you believe them for a moment because they are on television and the lighting is flattering. There is a gentle sarcasm here. The most serious promises of personal transformation are now delivered between a musical performance and an advertisement for snacks. Humans are adaptable. Humans will accept meaning in whatever format it arrives. Let us meet a producer, because producers are the people who try to bottle a moment and sell it as a clean experience. The producer sits in a control room that is warm enough to make you sleepy, except there is no time to be sleepy. Screens glow, headsets crack. A clock is visible, large and cruelly honest. The producer has a running order. The producer has a list of cues. The producer has a plan for the final minute that is detailed enough to feel like fate. This is the kind of person who measures emotion in seconds. The producer watches the live feed from the public celebration. People are bundled up. Their faces are bright with cold. The producer knows the camera angles. The producer knows which shot will land at the right moment. The producer knows that the audience at home will feel something if you show the right face at the right time. That is the modern ritual, curated togetherness. A singer performs. A comedian makes a gentle joke about time passing too fast. A host interviews someone who is famous enough to be on camera and calm enough to pretend this is all normal. Meanwhile, the clock moves forward with the calm indifference of the universe. As midnight approaches, the producer feels the soft tension that only people with deadlines truly understand. The tension is not about the new year, the tension is about timing. If a segment runs long, you cannot move midnight. Midnight does not wait for your show. Midnight is not a negotiable partner. So the producer calls cues, shortens something, extends something else, makes adjustments, tries to keep the program aligned with the moment that cannot be adjusted. And then you are in the final minute. The world narrows. The crowd is on screen. The host is smiling like someone who has practiced smiling for this exact purpose. The music swells. The producer grips the edge of the desk. The countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. The audience at home joins in, perhaps loudly, perhaps softly, perhaps with a little embarrassment because it feels silly and also comforting. Then midnight arrives. The screen fills with light. The crowd cheers. Confetti falls. The host says Happy New Year with the confidence of someone who has said it many times before. At home, a family might cheer, or might clap, or might simply breathe out. Some people watch quietly, feeling the moment in their chest without needing to display it. Some people call relatives. Some people make a toast. Some people look at the clock and think, I made it. Television has done something powerful. It has turned a public ritual into a shared private ritual. It has made the new year feel communal even when you are alone. It has offered companionship to the solitary. It has offered an excuse to stay in. It has also, gently, softly, unalived some of the silence. Because once you can fill the moment with noise on demand, it becomes harder to choose quiet. But the quiet never fully disappears. It waits patiently like winter itself. And that is where we go next. The story ends not with the loudest celebration but with the calmest one. The personal new year. The notebook. The resolution that is written without applause. The small private ritual that feels more honest than any broadcast. Chapter 10. The Quiet New Year, Resolutions, and the Sacred Notebook. Not everyone wants fireworks. Not everyone wants a crowd. Not everyone wants a host telling them how to feel. Not everyone wants to count down with strangers, even if the strangers are technically on a screen. Some people want a quiet New Year's, and quiet New Year's are not new. They are older than the party. They are the original shape of the ritual, when you marked the turning because you needed to, not because you wanted a spectacle. In the calm version, the room is small, the light is soft, the air smells like tea or cinnamon or whatever makes you feel that life is not only a series of tasks. In the calm version, the new year does not arrive with a bang. It arrives like snow. It arrives slowly and then suddenly everything is slightly different, mostly because you decided to notice it. This chapter is about the personal rituals that sit under the public ones. Resolutions, ledgers, diaries, planners. The quiet habit of looking back and then looking forward, and trying to do it with courage. The idea of making a promise at the start of a new cycle is ancient. People have long used year boundaries, however they were defined, as moments to renew commitments, to settle accounts, to begin again. In some ancient traditions, there were ceremonial renewals tied to the New Year festival, including vows and symbolic acts of resetting order. Even when the details differ, the pattern is the same. Humans like a moment that says, "You may try again." In later centuries, as literacy spread and paper became more common, the private record became a tool. The diary is not only a confession, it is a mirror. It is a place where time becomes visible. A ledger is similar. A ledger is a truth you can touch. It says, "This is what happened, this is what I saved, this is what I owe, this is what I hope." The ledger does not judge you, but it does not lie either, which can feel like judgment if you are not in the mood. Planners and calendars, in the modern sense, become companions. They hold the future in boxes. They promise that if you write things down, you will control them. This is not always true, but it is soothing. So on a quiet New Year's Eve, a person might do something very simple. They might open a notebook. Let us meet that person. Not a hero, not a villain, just a person. Someone who has lived another year and feels the weight of it in small places. They sit at a table with a lamp. The room is warm. Outside, the world is dark. Somewhere far away, there might be fireworks, but they are distant enough to feel like weather, not like a demand. The person opens a notebook. The paper is clean. The pen is ready. The person takes a breath and writes a few lines about the year that is ending. Note the official highlights, not the things you tell strangers, the honest things, the hard things, the small victories that nobody clapped for, the moments when they surprised themselves by not giving up, the moments when they did give up and later climbed back anyway. This is the calm drama of the personal New Year. It is not loud, but it is real. It has stakes, because the stakes are your life as you actually live it. The person might make a list, not a harsh list, a kind list. They might write, "Sleep more." They might write, "Be gentler to people." They might write, "Call my sister." They might write, "Save money." They might write, "Walk outside even when it is cold." They might write, "Stop pretending I do not need rest." These are not dramatic promises. They are not cinematic. They are the kind of promises that build a life. The sarcasm stays soft here, because this is not the moment to bully anyone. But there is still a gentle truth to say. Humans love the idea that a new year will fix them. It will not. The new year is a date. It is paper. It is a number. It has no hands. It cannot lift you out of your habits. But the new year can give you a frame, a boundary, a moment where you are allowed to pause and choose. And that choice matters even if it is small. So the person in the quiet room does not demand perfection. They do not write a list that would require a new personality by breakfast. They write a list that fits inside what human body. They also do something else. They close accounts. This might be literal, balancing a budget, closing a ledger, preparing a plan, or it might be emotional, forgiving something, letting something go, deciding to stop carrying a story that is too heavy. The night becomes a hinge, not because the universe changed, but because the person decided to treat it as a hinge. Midnight arrives. In a quiet New Year's, midnight is not a performance. It is a soft moment where the clock turns and nothing else has to happen. The person might look at the time. They might whisper Happy New Year to the room, they might drink water, They might feel a small tenderness for themselves, the kind that does not require a crowd. Then they might do the bravest quiet thing. They might go to bed. This is an underrated ending. Sleep is a form of trust. It says, I expect tomorrow to arrive. It says, I will be here for it. It says, I do not need to squeeze meaning out of every minute to prove that life matters. In that sense, the quiet New Year's connects back to the earliest winter festivals. The point was not spectacle. The point was survival, togetherness, and the steady decision to continue. So we have travelled from ancient midwinter fires to early calendars, from Roman reforms to shifting medieval dates, from precise standard time to fireworks and public countdowns, from Times Square performance to television companionship. And under all of it, the same impulse remains. We want a moment where we can say, we made it. We want a moment where we can set something down and pick something up. We want a moment that feels like a door. Time does not need doors. Time will keep walking. But humans do. We need thresholds, we need rituals. We need a night when we can be a little dramatic, even if the drama is only a notebook and a lamp. So if you are listening to this near the end of a year, or near the end of any hard stretch, here is the calm conclusion. You do not need fireworks to begin again. You do not need a crowd to be brave. You do not need a television host to bless your next step. You only need a moment of honesty and a little warmth, and the gentle willingness to turn the page.